26 weeks ago, we began with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And 26 weeks later, we find ourselves at the foot of the cross. This day finally came. This day was in the mind of God before He said, "Let there be light." God knew this day was going to come, and it finally did. Mike has begun our thinking about this cross through the songs. We've been reading about it all week long, and now we're going to take that journey with Jesus to the cross. Would you join me in song, though, as we continue? You may want to close your eyes as you think about the cross in your own mind. Would you join me in song? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed Him to a tree? Were you there when they nailed Him to a tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed Him to the tree? This past February, you and I spent an entire month. We spent 8 lessons looking at the cross. On February 23rd, we took a journey with Jesus down that 650-yard trip from the place where He was arrested and tried and flogged to the place of the skull, Golgotha. We're not going to retake that trip that we took just a very few months ago. You may want to get a copy. You may want to pull out your copy of the DVD or the CD that we made back at that time to think about some of the details of that particular journey. I want today to make this story really come off the page by looking at this story, looking at the cross through the eyes of those who actually witnessed it. And I want us, if you would allow yourself to look through the eyes of these particular people at this particular event that changed the world forever. We've been reading all this past week the part of the story where Jesus was in the darkest hours of His life. And for the next several minutes, let's take a look at the cross through the eyes of those who were actual witnesses of this particular scene. I want you to think of the thing that the disciples witnessed on the way to the cross. These disciples had been told by Jesus on numerous occasions that this day was going to come. And for many times, and for many of them, they didn't get it. Jesus had told them and reminded them often about this was where they were headed. This was where He was headed. But they didn't get it. As we get ready for this particular scene, remember the disciples had been told to go get the Passover meal ready. And therefore, they went to that upper room and they got all the preparations down, not knowing what was about to occur. The disciples had a unique view of this particular scene. Because after they had the Passover meal, after Jesus taught them about what we just got through doing a few moments ago, the text tells us that Jesus began to wash the disciples' feet. Remember, they're reclining at a table. They're not sitting behind a table in chairs. They are reclining at the table. And the text tells us in John 13 that Jesus got up from the table, got from where He had been having the meal. He took off His outer coat, and then He began to wash the disciples' feet. Don't know how many disciples' feet that He washed before somebody realized what He was doing. You see, this was beneath the dignity, maybe in some of their minds, of washing feet. Jesus, though, the room was filled with proud hearts and dirty feet. And Jesus began to wash their feet. Came to Peter. Remember what Peter said? You're not going to wash my feet. You'll never wash my feet. Jesus looked at him and said, if you don't let me wash your feet, you have no part in this. You got to love the Apostle Peter. And we'll look through his eyes in just a second. But look through the eyes of the disciples. And then they followed him out to the place of the garden where he was going to pray. Most of them stood outside, maybe at the entranceway. And then Peter, James, and John, you remember, they got to go on the inside of the garden. And Jesus came back 3 times and found them asleep. Can you imagine now how the disciples would have felt just in a few minutes after they watched the scene of the arresting that took place just after they got through praying? Think of the things the disciples witnessed on the way to the cross. As Ron read a moment ago, once Jesus got arrested, the disciples scattered. They thought they might be next, so they scattered. They may be looking over the top of maybe a wall, kind of putting a wall in between them and what was going on. But the disciples' view of the cross was very unique. Now they had left Jesus at the time when he maybe needed them the very most. Let's take a look at the cross through the eyes of Judas. I got an idea that Judas didn't think it was going to come down like it did. Judas was the guy that had walked with Jesus for 3 years. He was so trusted. He was the treasurer for the group. He carried the money bag. You remember a couple of times when Judas complained about wasting precious oil that could have been sold and helped a lot of poor folks eat. Judas, though, was the treasurer. He carried the bag. Judas had had an up-close and personal view of Jesus Christ. Things were always tight. Anybody in the room with your business or with your personal account have trouble with cash flow? Well, the disciples always was having trouble with cash flow. They didn't have a whole lot of money that they had that Judas carried. Well, Judas came up with a plan, a thought in his own mind. I know what I'll do. They want to find out about who this Jesus guy is. I'll make a deal. We'll get some extra funds, and then it'll all be over. I got an idea. Judas didn't think it was going to come down quite like it did. Well, Judas leaves after he had his feet washed. You remember Jesus said, what you're going to do, go do it quickly. And he goes and he makes a deal. He makes a deal with the officials. I'll tell you who he is. What am I going to get back? And they offered him a pretty good chunk of money compared to what normally was in the bag. I don't know if he put it in that bag. I don't know if he put it in his own pocket. I'm not sure what he did with it then. But I've got an idea that it didn't come down quite like Judas thought it was going to come down. Because after he took the money, and he leads them to where Jesus is, and then the kiss happens, and they arrest Jesus. And Judas watches the things as it occurs. It all went south after that. Judas had a unique view of this whole scene. He watched the arrest. He watched the trial. He watched the scourging. And then he felt really guilty what he'd done. I got an idea. He didn't think it was going to come down like it did. But think about the things that Judas, through his eyes, what he witnessed, what he saw, and what he thought. Let's take a look at this scene through the eyes of Peter. Can anybody in the room identify with Peter? Quick talking. How many in the room have a foot and mouth disease? That's what Peter had. He was always sticking his foot in his mouth. You got to love the Apostle Peter. Lord, I'll never die. I'll never give you up. Causes my death. I will never deny you. And what did Jesus tell him was going to happen just in a short period of time? You're going to deny that you even know me. No, won't do that. Won't ever do. Lord, I'll die for you. The Apostle Peter in the ministry had seen a lot of things. He'd got to be with Jesus during some very pointed times when other folks had not been able to see. He watched that little girl in the upper room raised from the dead. Peter got to witness the transfiguration scene where he heard the voice of God. The text says he saw a couple of pretty important folks of Old Testament history. Peter had a unique view of this whole scene. Wonder how Peter felt a little bit later after when Jesus came out praying that he found Peter asleep. I wonder the view that Peter had as he watched the trial But then comes the denials. You were with Jesus, wasn't you? Nope, wasn't me. You're the guy, I saw you with Jesus. No, it was not me. And then a third time. You were with Jesus. And then, I don't know what curse words he used, but the text says he cursed. And then something unique happened. The text tells us when Peter denied Jesus that third time, he looked, and Jesus was looking at him. How many in the room have ever had the look? If you're married, have you had the look? If you've got parents, you've had the look. This one was different. Can you imagine the look that Jesus gave Peter? And then Peter watched the rest of the story. Think about things that Peter thought. Think of the things that he saw through his eyes. Think about the guards. Think about what they had seen. There were 16 guards on duty that day to carry out the scourging, to carry out crucifixion. We talked about that back in February 23rd. The guards had seen it all, but think about what they saw and what they heard Jesus do and not do after they arrested him. They get to the entrance of the garden and they see the kiss and they arrest him. And he says nothing. And they begin to accuse him and they hear nothing. In fact, when the arrest happened, what does Peter do? He had poor swordsmanship. I don't know how he did it. Sam, can you imagine him, the sword? I don't know if that's how he did it. But what did the guards witness? I'll bet you when they had gone to arrest other folks, they'd heard a lot of things said, but they didn't hear Jesus. And it was probably the only time, Bob, that they would have seen Jesus or anybody pick up the ear and heal it. They got to see that. Think of what the guards saw just when they arrested Jesus. And then they drug him and they went through those assemblies throughout the night that were illegal. And then those 16 guards the next morning maybe was having breakfast, getting ready to go. That's just what their job was, to go through the scourging. And they get and they watch Jesus, and some of them slapped him. Some of them with a double-up fist would slug Jesus and they would spit on him and they would taunt him. But Jesus did not answer a word. Is anybody impressed with Jesus? With what the guards got to see. Think about the guards' perspective. They watched this thing unfold. Some of that 16 was there when in fact, one of those guys was the one that nailed the spikes through Jesus' hands and feet. Think of this scene through the eyes of the guards. Think of the chief priest and elders, and I got to make sure that our young men and women and anybody else maybe in the room, we're not talking about elders like Mike Agee, Steve Meek. We're not talking about our elders. Those elders were the older Jewish leaders that would have taught in the synagogues maybe. These were the older, smarter folks of the political realm as well. And they didn't know what they were going to do with Jesus. The chief priests and elders in the Sanhedrin, think about what they thought in this whole scene. They couldn't come up with anything to accuse Jesus of doing. They didn't know what to do with him. The chief priests, think about their view. So they gave him a lot of threats. And then throughout those illegal assemblies throughout the night, and they've got to please the people, but they've got a political group of folks also to please. They don't know what to do. They then began to bring in folks in their assemblies to try to make accusations against Jesus. Think about the things that they saw. Think about the things that they heard. Think about them witnessing the scenes with what's coming just in a real short time. Pilate had a unique view of the day. Think about Pilate with me. Pilate had the power to set Jesus free. But of all the ones that I've mentioned, Pilate was the one that had a Bible study with Jesus. Remember a couple of things that Pilate discussed with Jesus? He asked Jesus, what is truth? He had a Bible study with him. He had a discussion there with Jesus about what was right and what was good. Are you the Christ? Are you the King we've been looking for? Would you please tell us if you are? Pilate didn't know what to do with Jesus either because he knew he was innocent. He even had a visit. You may know in the room, you may remember that he had a visit from somebody while all this was going on. His wife. What did his wife say? Don't have anything to do with this guy. So what did Pilate do? He brings a bowl of water in front of the whole crowd. He washes his hands in front of everybody. Don't put him on me. I don't think he's guilty. If you want to take him, here. Pilate had a unique view of the day, and he gave him to the soldiers to lead him away to be crucified. Think about the view of Simon of Cyrene. 650-yard journey from the place where he was scourged to Golgotha. Somewhere along that journey, Simon is standing in the parade route. He's standing along the side watching this. You and I have studied, we for sure did back in February, crucifixion was a public thing. It was to embarrass. It was also to communicate a message to everybody else, don't disobey the law or this will happen to you. Imagine Simon somewhere in the crowd, somewhere right up next to the procession, somewhere along that 650-yard. Can you imagine being Simon? And now it's you and Jesus carrying the cross. Think of the view that Simon had of the cross. How about the two thieves on each side of Jesus? Remember what the thieves said? What did one of them say? Get us off here. You got the power. Get us off here. Save us. You've got that ability. And what did the other thieves say? Hush. We deserve what we're getting. This guy's innocent. Can you imagine their view of, they watched Jesus get the spikes in his hands and his feet. They watched the whole scene. Can you imagine the cross through the eyes of the thieves? Tonight, I hope you mothers will lead us in some discussion during our Bible class time tonight. As you look at this scene through the eyes of Mary. Ladies, can you imagine watching your boy die on a cross right in front of you? Think of the view that Mary had. Mary's view is not just of her son. Mary's also a view of her Savior. You remember, she's been writing things in her journal since he was 12. I made that journal part up. You remember that? She treasured all those things in her heart. I bet you that wasn't the only journal entry that she made during his life. I wonder at what point she realized that this day was coming. And now she's at the foot of the cross. Mothers, can you imagine? And then she heard Jesus say, John, Mother, Mom, John, take care of my mom. Mom, John's going to take care of you. Mary had a unique view of the cross. Think about the cross through the eyes of Mary. And moms, you're the only ones that can do that. Think about what the centurion said. The centurion had watched it all. He probably watched the scourging. He had probably watched the journey for 650 yards. He probably had watched the guys he had seen do it before find that hollow place in the wrist and nail that spike through the hands and then through the feet. And they lifted up the top part of that cross with a thud and probably placed it on the top of the post that was already in the ground. And he's standing there watching this whole thing. He saw the spear in the side. Out came blood and water. Anybody remember what the centurion said? We read it just a moment ago. This guy's the Son of God. This guy truly was the Son of God. Last 2 points of the lesson, the most important. I want you to think about God's view of the cross. You can talk about me, but don't you talk about my kids. True or false? You can talk about me. You can even hurt me, but don't hurt my babies. God's got to watch His boy die on a cross. You see, God had a pretty unique view as well. But then something that had never happened before happened. We read it a moment ago. What happened at noon? From noon till 3, it got pitch black. I believe that's God making a statement. I believe God's thinking, I've seen enough. They have tortured my boy enough. Enough. And at noon, it's pitch black and the torture is over. And for 3 hours, it's just totally dark. Pretty uncommon. I got an idea. God's making a statement. You've tortured my son enough. And then comes this thing through the eyes of Jesus. And this is really the one I want you to get. I want you to realize the view that Jesus had from the cross and what He chose to do. One of the songs that Mike led us in a few moments ago was, He could have called 10,000 angels. Could He have had? Could He had? Yeah. He could have come off the cross. Here's Jesus' view. Save yourself and save us. Could He have done that? Absolutely. But if Jesus had saved Himself, He wouldn't have saved you and me. He made a choice. He made a decision. And He chose to save us instead of saving Himself. Would you please react to that? Would you please react to that? He chose to save us instead of saving Himself. Let me give you a second view that He had from the cross. What was everybody else saying about Jesus? He's finished. He's finished. It's about over. But what did Jesus say? No, it is finished. My work I came to do, that's what's finished. I'm not finished. The work that I came to do, it is finished. Crowds saying, He's finished. Jesus said, no. My work is finished. A second view that Jesus had from the cross. Jesus showed us from the cross that He really is the way, the truth, and the life. And here's how we close the lesson. Now let's take a view of the cross through your eyes and mine. Because that's really an important view that we take. Because He died on the cross, what impact will that have on my life? What impact will that have on choices and decisions that I make? Will it make any difference at all? The view that you and I have of the cross is going to be impacted because of all these views that we've talked about today. There may be some in this very audience who've been studying for the last 26 weeks and you've realized God's love for you and that you've come to a conclusion, Jesus really did come and die for my sins, and you want to own Him in baptism. Maybe that's where you are in your journey. If that's where you are, we would love to baptize you into Jesus this very day. Or maybe you've realized I'm not walking near enough to Jesus like I need to be. And because of our journey we've taken together over the last several weeks, and because of this tremendous statement of love that Jesus communicated on the cross, I want to make a decision where I'm standing in just a moment to walk nearer my Lord. But let's close like this. Would you sing with me before Mike does? Were you there when you nailed Him to the tree? Were you there when they nailed Him to the tree? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble. Were you there? Sunday's coming. Is anybody glad? He didn't stay in the tomb, did he? He was raised from the grave. The next two songs that Mike will lead talks about the benefits of this day we've talked about today. Think about the words as Mike leads us. And during this first song, if we can help in any way with things going on in your life, if we can pray together or even baptize you into Jesus, that's what these moments are all about. Would you stand together? Let's worship in song, Mike.
What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make